All right, welcome and hello. My name is Sarah Oxley. I am an SEL coach in the MSD of Wayne Township, working with pre-K through sixth graders at 5 different elementary schools. And I want to welcome you to our first annual Social Emotional Behavioral Wellness Blitz. Thank you for being here with us today. We are hopeful that you're going to walk away with valuable information. I have a few housekeeping items. Everyone will be muted throughout the presentation, so please utilize the chat box for any questions you might have. At the end of the session, we will allow our group, Jessica, to answer as many questions as time permits. Also, at the end of the session, you'll be connected to a link and a QR code, which will give you an opportunity to provide feedback. So please make sure to fill that out, as feedback is such a gift that will help us learn and grow. I also wanted to highlight that there is a closed caption option toward the bottom of the screen in that bar down there. So if you like to read and want to use that closed caption, please by all means. And now I'm pleased to introduce you to Jessica Yoder, who will be discussing mindset and sensory motor integration for you and your students, the why, the what, and the how. Jessica.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Jess Yoder, and I am the Project Aware Specialist. I work for the Department of Education. I serve on the Social, Emotional, Behavioral Wellness team alongside some of my colleagues. I was hired about 2 years ago to oversee a federal grant called Project Aware. And Project Aware, our goal is to create demonstration sites for effective social emotional learning and mental health integration. So we are working in several districts, but the other part of my job is to do things such as this today, to provide professional development. When I was first hired, that was actually right around the time that we released our social emotional learning competencies. So we've been doing a lot of implementation, trying to do some professional development around those competencies. So that is part of the work here today. I will say that being a one-man show, I'll do my best to keep my eye on the chat box. But hopefully you can access the slides, and any links that you see on the Zoom, you'll have to click within the slides that you open in a separate tab. But everything here today, borrow, steal, adapt, and please feel free to follow up afterwards if you have some questions. I will try to create time at the end for us to do so. But hopefully we can get to some questions at the end. So today, I hope that I just came from another presentation saying we, so it might take me a second. I hope that you're able to understand how Indiana's social emotional learning competencies differ from CASEL. So there are many districts around our state and nation who have adopted CASEL, which stands for the Collaborative for Academics and Social Emotional Learning. They have 5 competencies. We'll go over why they're different and maybe why Indiana adapted them. I hope that you're able to explain how mindset, which is a specific competency of the 7, can be practiced yourself and taught. There's kind of 2 sides of this, and something we're always going back and forth in our conversations around social emotional learning is the importance of adults practicing these things, but then also being able to teach them. We're kind of building the plane as we fly it, if you will, with social emotional learning, because many of us, thinking back to our K-12 education, were not exposed to social emotional learning because it is emerging research and it is up and coming. So we are having to learn this as we teach it. So that's not to be neglected. I also hope that you can do the same with sensory motor integration. What does that mean? What does it look like in practice, and why is it important? And then hopefully you can also walk away with information and how to access some of these very specific strategies that can be implemented in the classroom. And thank you for whoever put the bit.ly in there. I feel like I have some of us, some supporters. Thanks. Yeah. And also the bit.ly is case sensitive. So if you can't access it, make sure the M, the S, M, and W, and B are capitalized. Sorry about that. So we'll start with social emotional learning. You are at a social emotional learning conference. So I'm going to fly through this. Hopefully you know what social emotional learning is, but the department sticks to the definition that actually CASEL works from, and that is the process through which children and adults, going back to that two sides of the plate, children and adults acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills. When I see those three words, I think of standards. I think of math standards. I think of language arts standards. You not only have to know the content, you have to believe in it. You have to believe it's true and that it works. And you have to understand the why behind it. You also have to have space, time, and resources to practice these things. That is a mind shift. Our students do not come into our classrooms with these beautifully developed socially and emotionally competent brains. We all know that, but we don't necessarily have systems within our educational structures that help us understand how to fill those gaps and how to intentionally teach social emotional learning skills. Typically, it's passed along to the social worker or the school counselor who might have a specialty in that, but in our educator prep programs, I went to Purdue and I thought it was a fantastic educator prep program. I did feel ready, but this was not part of my training, and we need to recognize that within our schools that it's not. Hopefully we can change that, but what are we trying to get them to know, believe, and be able to do? We want them to be able to understand and manage their emotions. We want them to be able to set and achieve positive goals. We want them to be able to feel and show empathy. We need them to establish and maintain positive relationships. This is a heavy hitter when it comes to secondary space, middle schools, high schools. How do you effectively create and maintain relationships with your peers and also the adults in your life? And then the big bucket of social emotional learning, make responsible decisions. So this is what social emotional learning is. So sensory motor integration and mindset fall within this bucket of social emotional learning. So on the left here, you'll see the CASEL wheel, which I mentioned before. CASEL developed this model way before Indiana came out with our SEL competencies. They have been doing pretty extensive research around social and emotional learning and what it takes to embed that in your classrooms and your schools, but then also your communities. You'll see kind of those outer spheres. On the right side, you'll see our competencies. There are 7. And you'll see that the 2 red arrows are pointing to the 2 that we added. We renamed CASEL, but there is an alignment. So below the graphics, you'll see that self-awareness, we call it insight. It's really the same thing. Self-management, regulation. Social awareness is connection, connecting with those around you. Relationship skills, collaboration. How do we collaborate? And then responsible decision-making skills in the CASEL world, we call that critical thinking skills. So you'll see that mindset and sensory motor integration are not included in CASEL, and that's really because of emerging research. We are lucky to be here in Indiana, where we have a university here in Indiana, Butler University, who has been doing social emotional learning in practice, but then also applying some of those new neuroscience concepts to education. And through the leadership of Dr. Lori DeSautel and Dr. Brandy Oliver out of Butler University, we were able to leverage that new information around brain science. Yes, we love Dr. Lori too. We're actually going to be doing a professional development led by her this coming Friday around MTSS. So don't miss out on that. Leveraging their expertise, we actually just added on top of CASEL's existing framework. So I want to look at ours specifically, and I want to point something out to you. And I actually was probably working for the department and working with these competencies for about 2 months before I realized that there was an image of a brain behind this. So I want to pose this question to the group, and feel free to either answer on your own or answer in the chat box if you're willing to participate. Why do you think there's a brain behind Indiana's 7 SEL competencies? What does the brain have to do with it? Go ahead and just take a stab at that. I'll give you a few moments to answer on your own or answer in the chat box. Let's see if we have any brave souls. Why do you think there is a brain behind our competency model? because you can't learn new skills when in the wrong brain state. Brain-based competencies. These are all fantastic answers. I'll give you a few more minutes. Metacognition, okay, yeah, definitely part of it, especially when we're talking about mindset and insight. Okay, well, I'll tell you why. It really is based on that new neuroscience research that has come out really in the past 5-10 years. And so this is a triune brain model. And this is simplified. If you were a brain surgeon, you would look at this and say, there's a lot more going on than just those 3 sections. And so this is definitely simplified, but I think for educators, it's really effective when it comes to trying to explain social emotional learning and how the brain develops. So human brains are not complete at birth. We all know that. They continue to develop, but they actually develop systematically from the bottom up. So if you're looking down at the bottom, that's our reptilian brain. That's our instinctual or dinosaur brain. That is the very first thing when you are a baby that is attuned, that is ready. You need to be fed, you need to sleep, you need to be changed. It's all those instinctual things. Then moving up into the limbic brain, that's where many of our K-12 students are really living on a daily basis. It's their emotional and feeling brains. Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, who wrote a book called The Stroke of Insight. She said her quote is that we are feeling creatures with thinking brains. We tend to think it's the opposite, that we have thinking brains and then we feel on the side. No, we're emotional people. We need to attune and connect with each other's emotions and regulate with each other before we tap into that the cortex up at the top there. And that's where our rational brain is. As a teacher, I always wanted my students to just like show up in my classroom, like right there in that rational thinking brain. I didn't necessarily understand this science behind how the brain develops, but for some reason I just had this expectation that they could live there and be there all the time, because that's where we needed to work. I need them in that part of their brain in order to learn, but there were things that I instinctually did in order to connect with them and do things that I know were needed, but I didn't necessarily have it embedded within my structures in my classroom. So we have to attune to the reptilian brain first and foremost. We have to make sure that our students, if you know about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we need to make sure that they are fed, that they have slept, right? All of that is important. And then we need to connect with them. We need to make sure we attend to them and attune with their emotional feeling brain. And if and only if we do that, can we access and help them develop their rational and thinking brain. So this is why we have a brain behind this, because all of our social emotional learning strategies are rooted in this science. It's trying to help teachers and educators do those things to attend to the reptilian brain and limbic brain first in order to teach them how to regulate, how to collaborate, so that they can arrive at that neocortex level. So based on this educational neuroscience, one of the competencies that we added was sensory motor integration. And you'll see this picture here, and this is actually me when I was a teacher. I was actually a teacher in Wayne Township. So home base status here on this conference. But I taught second grade at Southfield Elementary School for 5 years, and I was a reading interventionist for 1 year when I first got out of college. And you'll see here I had the students up, and they were writing spelling words, and we were moving our body and spelling the words from the ground up, and then we were jumping up in the air and shouting the spelling word. I actually learned that strategy when I was student teaching in Avon, and then embedded it here. Little did I know that it was a strategy that is now embedded into sensory motor integration, helping kids move their bodies in order to access the information. Sensory motor skills lead to emotional regulation. Emotional regulation and regulation skills are not over here, and sensory motor movement is here. They're connected. They support each other. So then they also benefit students who have experienced significant trauma or adversity in their lives. So students who have experienced trauma in their lives, their lower brain regions may not have been developed in ways that students who were supported and attuned to as babies were. So it actually helps repair those lower brain regions. So all of the strategies that I'm about to talk about in terms of sensory motor are trauma informed. These are going to help those students who have experienced or are still experiencing trauma on a daily basis. They need these. They need help repairing those lower brain regions. And then also helps prime the brains for cognition and function. So for all students, this is why this is a tier 1 strategy. It helps them prime their brain and then also be well, right? All right, next slide. So within our competencies, you will see what we call indicators or I can statements. In standards-based education, academic, it would be I can accomplish this, this skill or this strategy. We have the exact same things within our competencies listed on our website, and I'll make sure that you have that website before we leave today. But we want students to be able to feel awareness of their body in comparison to objects around them. And then they also be able to feel emotions in their body. I am just now understanding, due to some support that I'm receiving, how much stress I hold in my body. And when I release that stress and when I tend to that stress in my body, I feel a lot better. We hold emotions in our body. So these strategies are going to help students release those emotions, whether or not they know they are or not, it doesn't matter. But release some of those emotions that they're actually holding in their body. We also want them to be able to say that they feel ready for transition and can show that they're adaptable to change. And this is huge right now in the world of COVID. And I also should have prefaced that at the beginning of the presentation, but many of these strategies, obviously when we created the toolkits and the competencies and the lesson plans, all of those were in the context of having students in person around us. At the department, we're working really hard to try to help adapt that to a virtual space or whatever that might be in the near future. But I believe that these can be adapted to a virtual space, or we can provide parents with support that encourage them to do some of these things at home. So transitions are huge. We all know, right? Think about that after lunch, or right after a passing period if you're in secondary space. It takes a moment, right? Especially if there was something that happened, or if there was something that was said in the hallway, right? Transitions are hard for kids. Change is hard for kids. Some of these strategies can help them adapt to that change and help them be ready for kind of the next thing that was planned. When I say brain intervals or boosters, I really try hard not to say brain breaks. And I still say it, so I'm still trying to train myself not to. But I think that sends the wrong message. When we say, let's take a brain break, it's actually sending the wrong message, because if you take a brain break and let's say you're going to do some movement or some breathing, that's actually a brain boost. These are boosting our brains and helping us be ready for learning. Dr. Lori talks about focused attention practices. So if you click that link in the slides, that will take you to an Edutopia article that explains what a focused attention practice is. But what it really is it's a quick break that helps them refocus and return to work and ready to learn. So there's kind of two categories of focused attention practice, things that kind of ramp students up. If you are coming back and students are kind of lethargic and they feel like they've got no energy and they just want to take a nap, there are focused attention practices that can be done to kind of boost them and give them energy. On the other hand, you might have a classroom who is super stimulated and you need to come down. There are strategies that are for those sort of situations based on where your group of students are. So focused attention practices are great for transition. Things as simple as Simon Says, movement, song, dance, yoga, breathing. We're going to do one here in a second. These are encouraged as part of strategies that can attend to those lower brainstem and get students ready for learning. This is a social emotional learning competency. Students, this needs to be normalized. So a lot of times we think of these strategies as interventions. And I really hope, if you hear nothing from me today, is that these need to be embedded within the structures that exist on a daily basis. If you as an educator are only using these as a reactive strategy, that's going to be really hard because you're sending the message to students that this is punitive. We're doing this because you're not ready to learn. How can we send the message that we're doing these things just because they're good for our body and our mind and we always do them, and I'm going to do them with you? They're preventative. You might have a few students over in the corner that you are thinking, I really think that they're right there on that edge and they might need an intervention, but it's all about how you schedule them and how you are communicating the usefulness of these strategies. I encourage you not to use them as a tier 2 punitive reactive strategy. How do you embed these in your daily practices with students? Okay, so one of the first things, I'm going to try to break some of these strategies up into grade bands, but sometimes they could be used in K-12. You could do this with kindergartners just as much as you could do this with 12th graders, and you can do this yourself. I said at the beginning that I want you to think about these strategies not only just as instructional practices for students to embed within your practices within your classroom, but for yourself as well. You can be doing these on the weekends. You can be doing these in a half hour before students walk into your classroom. These are just as effective, just as important as for you as an adult. So really quickly, I'm going to create a space. If you are like, I've got a million things over in the corner, I totally understand if you need to attend to that. But if you are ready and willing and open to create a few moments here where you can find some quiet and practice some breathing, you cannot teach what you do not know. So part of doing this is learning how these strategies work. So one of the strategies, and this visual actually is linked here, is called square breathing. And this is a strategy that can be used within the classroom, but it needs to be taught. The first probably 5-10 times you do this with students, there's gonna be a lot of giggling. It's gonna be awkward, right? Like it's gonna be weird. But if you normalize this and get students into the habit and starting to feel the benefits of it, it'll feel better. So what you do is you would put the square breathing visual up. You'd show them where we're gonna start, and they can either trace it in their mind, they can close their eyes, whatever feels good. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna breathe in for 4 seconds, and I'll count you through this in a second. You're gonna hold that breath for 4 seconds, visualizing going down the right side of the square. And then you're gonna exhale for 4 counts. And then you're gonna hold, visualizing yourself going up the square, hold that breath for 4 seconds, and then we start it over again. When I do this, it probably takes me about 30 seconds to kind of get myself centered and in a rhythm. Sometimes I'm like, and I'm like, I can't hold the breath for 4 seconds. So that's okay. If that's you, that's okay. I think it usually takes about a minute. So I'm going to talk you through about 3-4 rounds of this and see if it helps you right now in this moment. So find a comfortable spot if you're ready and willing. If you want to sit down, close your eyes. I will talk you through it. But if you visualize the square in your head, that might be helpful. So exhale all your breaths. We're going to start at the upper left-hand corner. You're going to breathe in for 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold your breath for 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold it, 4, 3, 2, 1. Breathe in, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold it, 4, 3, 2. Slow exhale for 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold it, 4, 3, 2. Big inhale slowly for 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold it, 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold your breath, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I would have probably done that 3 or 4 more times because that last one you probably found a rhythm and you got used to holding your breath and slowly inhaling. The slow exhales are hard for me. After I hold that breath, I kind of blow out all my breath. So the slow exhales are the hardest part for me. But these are all regulation strategies and strategies that can attend to that lower brainstem and help prepare students and yourself to be present and ready to move forward. So a strategy that can be implemented virtually, just like I just did. You want to try to create kind of a tempo. You want to definitely model. You might ask the students to watch you do it first, which might feel silly, but that's okay. But that could be implemented virtually just as much as in space. We've seen some teachers who just put this visual up on their board, and it's a reminder, and they might have someone in their classroom that that reminds them, hey, we haven't done square breathing in a while, and they might point to it, and you might take some time at the beginning of the day, after a transition, before they go home, right before they go home, you might do this as well. So this could be used for all grade levels. Something that would be more appropriate for early elementary, so thinking like K through 3rd. I wouldn't recommend you doing this in the secondary space. It might feel a little hokey, but there's actually a video of this activity in action. But thinking about virtual spaces and potentially in the near future, this could be done virtually as well. And this is on page 31 of our SEL toolkit. So you'll have to scroll down. There's quite a long document there. But on page 31, you'll see this screenshot here. And this explains how to do a rain shower. So I think I actually did this when I was in elementary school. But it essentially helps create kind of some rhythm. Rhythm is actually one of the best regulation strategies. Having students clap, having students stomp and drum. Dr. Lori is such a fan of drumming, and there's actually a ton of great research around that and how that helps with regulation and attunement. So that's embedded here. So what the students would do is they would start, you could start with one student, you could start with the entire class, and they simply start rubbing their hands together furiously, and you start asking them, what are you feeling, right? They're starting to feel warmth. They might start to feel some numbing or some sensations. So they start with this, making kind of that quiet rain, and then they might start snapping their fingers, creating a little bit louder, okay? And then they might tap their hands on their thighs, create a little bit more rhythm, and then they might stomp their feet in order to make it really loud, like a thunderstorm. So doing a rain shower, all of those sensory things are really great for students. And again, not just students who are dysregulated in the moment. They probably won't want to do that for you, but just a fun activity that they could do. And you can even connect that to any of the content that deals with weather or things like that. So feel free to watch that video. It's going to show you what that would look like and how to, if you want to get fancy with it, you can do it in progression and have students add on, or you could assign students to a certain movement. I love that one. Late elementary, this might be a little bit too, it might be too focused for early elementary, but if you've ever heard of a progressive muscle relaxation, there's actually a script linked there that you could walk students through. This could be done virtually as well, but for those who don't feel like they are qualified, all of these strategies do not require you to have a mental health background. All of these strategies can be implemented by parents, by teachers, but we're providing some resources in order to help you understand, well, what is best practice? What would I say in order to do a progressive muscle relaxation? You can access that link, and it essentially walks them through going back to that concept about holding stress in our body. It goes through different parts of their body. So they grip their fists and they visualize stress in their hand, and then they release it and they feel that release. And then they hold their biceps. So it kind of walks them through different parts of their body and has them tense up and then relax. So a great conversation to have would be, how do we feel at the beginning versus how do we feel at the end? That could be a really good thing to help students understand. There is a full actual lesson plan on a progressive muscle relaxation. If you want to think about, well, what would you say at the introduction? How would you introduce this? What would be some follow-up questions? There's a full lesson plan on page 28 for this, linked in our lesson plans. And that is another sensory motor integration, but might be more appropriate for a later elementary level. I'm going to take a moment and pause, grab a drink. If you have any questions thus far, feel free to shoot those in the chat box, but I will make sure we have time at the end to take any questions as well. Okay, this might be more appropriate for a middle school level, but could certainly be adapted to a elementary or secondary space. And this is on page 32 within the SEL toolkit linked there. And this is a script. So I think this is so appropriate for right now and could be done virtually as well. But it's a script that walks them through a compassion meditation. And that really is thinking outside of ourselves. A lot of meditation goes inward and thinks about yourself. This one encourages students to come outside and find compassion outside of themselves. So I'm just going to read you part of this script, which can be found there, just so you can get an idea of what this might sound like if you were to do a compassion meditation with a middle school group. So you would say, as you breathe deeply, focus on your heart and visualize softness, warmth, and compassion going into your chest. Repeat these phrases to yourself. May I be happy. May I be well. May I be safe. May I be peaceful and at ease. So after a minute or two, the visualize would extend this energy. So you wouldn't say this, but to include someone you care about. May my mom, dad, sister, may they be happy. May they be well. May they be compassionate. So it asks them to think about someone outside of themselves and show compassion and wish them well. So that would be what a compassion meditation would be. But there's many opportunities within this script to ask them to practice compassion, even if it's just mentally and not acted upon. I think that's an important skill to start building some empathy. Okay, so we're going to move on to mindset. Before I do, I want to recognize that I handpicked some of these concrete examples. There are many, many more. So when I've been sending you to this SEL toolkit or our lesson plan link, that doesn't mean that these are the only strategies for sensory motor. There are many, many more. So I highly encourage you to take some time to read those. And within the lesson plans, there are some that are specifically adapted for high school. So I know I didn't go over a specific high school example, but they're definitely within there. So moving on to mindset. The buzzword of growth mindset has been around a long time. And that's embedded. All of that research around growth mindset is embedded in this, has not been changed. But what is included is teaching kids not only about how to have a growth mindset, but then also teaching them about their brain, teaching them how their brain functions. What are the different parts? How do they work? What happens when I get mad? Which part of my brain is online? Which part of my brain is offline? So what you'll see that is included in this, that is beyond maybe the work that you've done around growth mindset, is actually teaching kids about their brain. So we want students to be able to have the ability to demonstrate cognitive flexibility and a willingness to learn. Imagine if your students had perseverance, adaptability, self-discovery, resilience, and the ability to both give and receive feedback. Students can learn that their brains are malleable and that they can change, adapt, and learn new things. This concept of neuroplasticity is so important. And I think that adults tend to think, oh, that's neuroplasticity, that's a big word. We don't need to teach our students about that. It's really not that complex of a concept if you break it down for students, that, if feelings can pass. they're important. You need to talk about them. You need to recognize them, but they pass. Our brains can adapt. And this is also a really important concept for a trauma-responsive and a trauma-informed environment, is teaching kids that have experienced significant trauma or adversity, or adults. This is for you. So I'm talking to you as an adult as well. If you have experienced trauma and adversity in your life, your brain can adapt and heal, just like an injury, a physical injury can heal. Our brains can do the same. They're malleable. They can change. This concept of neuroplasticity is taught through strategies that you'll see within Mindset. One of them, this is a link to a YouTube link, which I'm not going to bite that off. I'm not going to play a video today because I'm not feeling like the technology world's on my side. So feel free to watch that. It really is just a video, a read aloud, if you will, of the book called Ish by Peter Reynolds. And that is the basis of one of our lesson plans for grades 3 through 5, which is on page 44 within our lesson plan. And this is teaching students about flexible and innovative thinking. So we want students to be able to say, I believe it's important to practice different strategies, show willingness to keep trying, and apply creative ideas. And so it uses this book to teach that concept and have conversations around that concept. So I just wanted to point this out as one of the lesson plans that could be used. You don't have to write it. It's already written for you. This could be included. If you have a virtual space that you could show this to a class, or if you could link this to something that you're sending home and provide some of the guiding questions within the lesson plan, this would be a great thing to help students right now think about. There's a lot of change going on. I can adapt. I'm trying to be willing to change, and how can I get creative with some of these quote unquote problems that are around me? And then I spoke earlier about the 100 days of educational neuroscience. This is a screenshot. You won't be able to click any of those links. But if you want to go to the full document, I just wanted to give you kind of a taste of what you'll see when you go to that educational neuroscience document. They have a guiding question. So you do not have to know about neuroscience to teach this, to walk through this with your class, or to do this in a professional learning community. This might be something that you utilize for the adults in your space. If you're like, I don't feel like we're ready to implement this with classroom, why not get a group of teachers and walk through one of these each day? You would have a guiding question. Well, what is the brain like? And then some strategies and some resources that you would need in order to answer that question. And there might be some to-dos. We have seen this as a very popular science and STEM resource that has been kind of connected to content within science and STEM that has been used in the secondary space, but it's K-12. So of course you as an educator would adapt it to be developmentally appropriate, but this was created by Dr. Lori DeSautel, and the full reason why it is here is to simply teach kids about their brain and to empower them with that information in order to improve their regulation skills and improve their social and emotional competencies. I just saw a question, and that's a really great question in the chat box because we get a lot of questions about this. There's a lesson plan document, and those are full scope and sequence lesson plans. And then there's a separate SEL toolkit. I've referenced both at different points today. They are two different things. The lesson plan is going to be organized by grade level, and it's going to have assessment options, and it's going to have scope and sequence. The toolkit is different in that it's not a full lesson plan. It's more of just a quick strategy that you could use. Of course, you could expand it and make it a full lesson plan, but the toolkit is more full K-12 strategies within each bucket of each competency. So yes, they are two different things. Thank you for the question. Okay, part of the competency mindset is helping educators understand why language is so important. Increasing the use of process praise. So process praise is essentially the difference between praising the person and praising the process. So I'm going to put a few I'm going to put a phrase here that kind of explains the difference between the two. And this may be new, this may be old information from this, but instead of saying you are smart, that you are a smart person for using that strategy to solve that problem, we want to adjust our language to talk about behaviors. I noticed you use that strategy we're practicing. I'm not giving an evaluation of what type of person that is. Yes, they're smart. That was a smart thing to do. But the simple use of language is very important for students. Just noticing. Another example would be you are athletic. So identifying that that person is athletic based on something you saw, or recognizing, I wonder what you did to start making so many free throws, right? So they started making free throws, you saw them make free throws, you said you are athletic. Or you can help them think about all of the things that they did before they made all those free throws, the behaviors that they own and that they encompass in order to start making so many free throws. So it might just feel like a tiny shift, but there's a lot of research that talks about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation and how we use, how we promote intrinsic motivation. If we are always qualifying students and telling them they are certain things, they're constantly going to be reaching out for validation and waiting for you to tell them what type of person they are, versus thinking about the things that they're doing in order to be that type of person. So it's really the difference between a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And there's a ton of strategies and resources, visuals that you can use within our toolkits and our lesson plans. And here's one of them. On the right side, you could simply put this on your desk to help you kind of remember the power of language that you use. So it gives very similar examples to what I just gave in terms of, instead of this, try using this phrase with students. We also have a couple videos that you could use to help students grow their growth mindset, so to talk about this concept, but then also a link to the infographic if you want to use this within your practices. And I really appreciate those that have been putting the links in the chat box. If you're having trouble accessing the links, it's because you need to go to the slides that I will make sure before you leave today that you have a link to those slides. Everything that you'll be able to interact with must be done on Google versus on Zoom. So thanks for those who are supporting in the chat box. Okay, the last couple of things that I'm going to talk, the last thing I'm going to talk about, and then I will actually have time, yay, I have time for questions, is the science of happiness. I feel like we put this at the end of all of our presentations, but every single time there's somebody that doesn't know this exists. So I just want to make sure this is on your radar. And if it already is, fantastic. Maybe this will nudge you to interact with it a little bit more at the end of this summer. So on our website, which is listed there, you'll see one of the tabs is the science of happiness. And this was created in a response to Dr. McCormick actually led this charge, and she connected with Dr. Lori Santos, who is out of Yale University. Dr. Lori Santos, she created an undergraduate class in response to the alarming number of suicides on their campus. And she believed and did some research around the fact that these students really just didn't know what it took to be happy. They thought that happiness was attaining things outside of themselves, right? Going back to that extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. So she dug into the research and she created a really kind of research heavy course, of course, because it's Yale, on what is the science of happiness? What truly actually makes people happy? And so she embedded this, and it was one of the most popular undergraduate courses on Yale campus. So Dr. McCormick heard about this and said, she has much experience in schools, and said, I think this is what teachers need. And so she first wanted to figure out how to roll this out for educators. And so we worked with Butler University to adapt that course to be relevant and packaged in a way that was accessible for Indiana educators. Now I say that in that it's free, it's online, it's self-paced, and you don't necessarily have to be an educator to access it. We've had some DCS educational liaisons participate in the course. Anyone can participate in the course. There are prompting questions that ask about the applicability of this content within the classroom, so it is definitely geared towards educators, but it's free and you can access it on our website. So make sure you go to the tab. It's housed on a platform called Moodle, which is what DOE uses for some of our learning, but you can access it there. And if you have any issues, feel free to shoot me an email and I'll help you work through those. But it's actually, you get 45 PGPs, professional growth points, when you finish the course, which is a ton. That is about half of what you need for a license renewal. So a lot of educators, we have over 4,000 educators that have at least enrolled in the course. And again, you can finish it in a week, you can finish it in 6 months, whatever works for you. So I highly encourage that. And that really is, would support the side of social emotional learning that is for you, right? For educators to understand how to improve their own social emotional learning competence. We did, in response to the COVID pandemic, is we adapted that to for high school. So you'll see another tab on there that says the Science of Happiness for Students. We have some schools that are embedding that within their curriculum for students next fall, which is really exciting. So if you're interested in that, that is there as well. So I will end here, open it up for questions in the chat box if you have any, and I will pass it off to Sarah, who can tell you about conference evaluation and how to provide some feedback.
Perfect. Thank you, Jess. That was wonderful and so comprehensive. And I echo the sentiment that just thank you for all the concrete ideas. Jessica mentioned the 100 Days of Neuroscience. That's been linked into the chat box, as has the toolkit and the lesson plans. So everything that she referenced is in there. I also included the Social Emotional Behavioral Wellness website through DOE. There are tons of other resources and tools and videos you can access to just, add more of a repertoire to your toolkit.
Yeah, and we have a newsletter, a monthly newsletter as well. So if you scroll down to the bottom of that webpage and you just give us your name and email address, you'll get 1 email a month from us, and it is kind of up-to-date, upcoming professional development opportunities. So I mentioned Dr. Lori's professional development this coming Friday. If you were signed up for that newsletter, you would have gotten an email that told you information on how to access that. If you're interested in this Friday and attending that, there's a 101 and a 201. My email address is here. Send me an email and I'll make sure you have that login information. You don't have to register in person, but that newsletter has up-to-date information on upcoming professional development and resources.
And besides that, there were not any other questions asked in the chat box. So if you have a question and you want to unmute yourself and ask now, by all means. Otherwise, go ahead and put your question in the chat box. I'll go ahead and explain the eval piece. That way, if you're formulating a question, you have a little bit of time. So Jeff, thank you so much for sharing that information. I also want to say a huge thank you to IUSA, the Indiana Urban Schools Association, and the Indiana IEP Resource Center for partnering with us in the creation and logistics of this amazing event. We couldn't do it without you, literally. And thank you to the Department of Ed, so Jess and your team, for promoting this event across the state. So before you leave, you see 2 links on the screen and then 2 QR codes. If you don't mind completing those, your feedback is invaluable, and that we can take it and better hone our craft, and then our symposium for next year. So those are my thanks. And again, if you have questions, please type them in the box or go ahead and answer now. Otherwise, thank you for joining this session, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Jess.